Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this panel discussion in the ongoing series, Clearing the Pathway for Healing and Policing in America. This event is presented by Lions Strategy Group. My name is Evan Barbie. I'm a writer, coach, and educator based in Nashville, Tennessee. As an affiliate service provider with Lions Strategy Group, it's my privilege to moderate this afternoon's event. Lions Strategy Group is dedicated to reconnecting people with the hope that policing was intended to provide. When an officer is called, they are supposed to embody whatever is necessary for the best outcome in any given situation. Yet the profession has historically been an epicenter of inequality, injustice, and incredibly strained relationships between law enforcement personnel and community members. President Calvin Coolidge once said, "No one is compelled to choose the profession of a police officer, but having chosen it, everyone is obligated to perform its duties and live up to the high standards of its requirements." The image bearer of Nobility recognizes that creating stronger human connections and community engagement with all segments will lead to improved public safety and more effective crime fighting. The research tells us that despite 3 decades of falling crime rates and improved training, technology, and tactics, public trust in the police has not improved. Instead, empirical assessments of trust and confidence in the police have remained generally unchanged in recent years. A damaging national narrative has come to the forefront in which law enforcement officers, whether federal, state, local, or tribal, are seen not as protectors of communities, but rather as oppressors. In times of great challenge, there is no greater need than for the nobility of the policing profession to nurture and protect democracy. So how do we build the foundation of trust necessary to form a true alliance between the police and the people we serve? The reality of policing is such that our officers serve in the most challenging of environments, often misunderstood, often criticized, and far too often placed in circumstances demanding a split-second decision with enormously high stakes. Nonetheless, the day each officer dons the uniform, they make this pledge. On my honor, I will never betray my badge, my integrity, my character, or the public trust. I will always have the courage to hold myself and others accountable for our actions. I will always uphold the Constitution, my community, and the agency I serve. As a peaceful guardian, one must. It is times like this when the warrior archetype appears. For those of you joining us as audience members, I would like to remind you to please stay muted throughout this event as we seek to give the floor to our panelists. Should you have any questions, please use the chat feature located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. With that being said, I'll introduce our panel of sitting chiefs. Chief Deputy Noel Johnson currently serves as the Chief Deputy for Constable Carlos Lopez, Travis County Constable Precinct 5 in downtown Austin, Texas. Johnson has been a Texas peace officer for over 23 years and has a wide range of experience to include criminal enforcement, criminal investigations, law enforcement training, police officer advocacy, police labor relations, and government relations at the local, county, and state level. He most recently served as a legislative liaison and government affairs specialist at the state capitol for the last 3 legislative sessions, working on behalf of more than 28,000 police officers in the state of Texas. Chief Johnson graduated from Stephen F. Austin State University in 1997 and holds a BA in sociology and criminal justice. He has experience teaching on a very diverse catalog of topics, including sexual assault and family violence, officers' rights and responsibilities, cultural diversity, police leadership, de-escalation techniques, and civilian interaction with law enforcement. Welcome to the panel, Chief Deputy Johnson. Assistant Chief Darren M. Stevens began his law enforcement career with the Plano Police Department in 1990. While in Plano, he was promoted through the ranks to lieutenant and worked in that capacity as a patrol lieutenant, administrative lieutenant, and criminal investigations lieutenant. He was hired in 2002 by the Frisco Police Department as a captain. Prior to his promotion to assistant chief in 2013, he served as a captain and deputy chief in both the operations and service bureaus and has experience in overseeing every functional aspect of the agency. He holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and a master's degree in business administration, and is a graduate of the ILEA 64th School of Supervision and 37th Management College, the FBI National Academy, the PERF Senior Management Institute for Police, and the FBI Law Enforcement Executive Development Seminar. Welcome to the panel, Assistant Chief Stevens.
Thank you, Eddie.
Chief Frank Dixon was sworn in as the chief of the Denton Police Department in October of 2018, where he currently oversees a department of more than 200 sworn personnel and 59 civilian employees with an annual budget of $34 million. Chief Dixon prioritizes transparent communication and community policing to build upon and improve the existing relationships within the Denton community. He came to Denton with more than 23 years of law enforcement experience with the Austin PD, where he successfully worked his way through the ranks to the position as Assistant Police Chief. Since coming to the city of Denton, Chief Dixon's leadership philosophy of being present and engaged, mentoring, and actively leading from the front has led to transformational change in the culture of the police department. Chief Dixon is a United States Marine Corps veteran and attended Lamar University, where he received a Bachelor of Science degree in criminal justice and a Master of Science degree in criminal justice. He's a member of the Major Cities Chiefs Association and is a graduate of the Police Executive Leadership Institute, the Senior Management Institute for Police by the Police Executive Research Forum, APD's Leadership Command College, and the West Point Leadership Course. Good to see you again, Chief Dixon. Thank you for your service, and welcome again to the panel.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Chief Ed Drain began his law enforcement career with the Plano Police Department in 1994 and progressed through the ranks as a sergeant, lieutenant, and captain. In 2006, he was appointed as the Assistant Police Chief, a position he held for 10 years. During that time, he managed all department operational areas, including patrol services, criminal investigations, and support services. From June to September 2015, Chief Drain served as the interim chief for the Murphy Police Department while still employed with the Plano Police Department. In July 2016, he was appointed as the interim chief for the Amarillo Police Department and was formally selected as the police chief for that department the following October. Last February, Chief Drain returned to Plano to serve as the police chief, where he is actively engaged in his community through his work supporting a variety of community-based and nonprofit organizations. Before his law enforcement career, Chief Drain served in the U.S. Army as an EOD officer. In 2004, he was recalled from reserves to active duty and assigned to serve in Iraq, where he was awarded a Bronze Star, among other military decorations. Chief Drain retired in 2007 as a lieutenant colonel with 24 years combined active and reserve military experience. He's a graduate of the Institute for Law Enforcement Administration School of Police Supervision and the ILEA School of Executive Leadership. He's also a graduate of the FBI National Academy and is certified by the Texas Commission of Law Enforcement as an instructor and master peace officer. Chief Drain has a Bachelor of Science degree in criminal justice from the University of Texas at Arlington and an MBA degree from Amberton University, as well as a certification in public management from the University of Texas at Dallas. Thank you for your service to our country, Chief Drain, and welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Ellen.
Chief Jessica Robledo served the city of Austin for 30 years and has more than 15 years of executive and supervisory experience. She joined the city of Pflugerville PD as an interim chief in January of 2017 and was sworn in as Pflugerville Chief of Police the following February. Robledo has emphasized the importance of first responder mental health and physical health within the department. As part of this effort, she created the first mental health resilience annual check for each employee within the industry. The Service of American and International Law Suicide honored Robledo for taking the initiative to protect and enhance the mental health of officers in her department. The suicide prevention program has become a model for other departments nationwide. Robledo has a Bachelor's of Science in Physical Education from Angelo State University. Her passion is to mentor kids who share the same traumatic childhood she experienced and encourage perseverance, helping them develop the strength they need to overcome the challenges they face. Welcome to the panel, Chief Robledo.
Thanks for having me.
Chief Gary Miller graduated from Southwest Texas State University in 1974 with a degree in criminal justice. Chief Miller began his law enforcement career in January 1975 with the University of Texas at Austin Police Department, moving on to serve the McAllen Police Department for 14 years. Having worked his way to captain of Uniformed Service Bureau, Chief Miller was hired in 1989 as the Chief of Police with the Boerne Police Department, where he served for 22 years. In January 2012, Chief Miller retired from Boerne PD and worked as an instructor for the Texas Police Chiefs Association, assisting with the Developing Leaders for Texas Law Enforcement course. In January of 2013, he agreed to serve as Chief Deputy in Kendall County, and the following September was sworn in as Bee Cave Police Chief. During his career, Chief Miller has also earned a Master of Justice Administration from Norwich University in 2008. He's a graduate of the FBI National Academy and previously served as Regional Director for TPCA and President of the Alamo Area Police Chiefs Association in 2011. Chief Miller, good to see you again and welcome back to the panel.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
With that being said, I'm going to shift directions into the discussion portion. Again, I'll just remind everyone to please stay muted as a participant so that we can give the floor to our panel of chiefs. First question in the topic around what it means to be an image bearer of nobility is for our police chiefs. Today, in this day and age, in this climate, what does it mean to be a symbol or an image bearer of nobility?
I'll go. I didn't raise my hand, sorry, guys.
Okay, go ahead, Chief Robledo, and then we'll move on to Chief Stevens.
All right. So I think that as a chief, I should demonstrate the passion that's in my heart and the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing. So many of us have so many years of service. And why do we do it? Do we do it because we have to, or do we do it because we have a passion to serve? You have to be able to communicate your why and plant your seeds of growth, despite all the barriers and challenges that are being thrown at you. If we don't lead that charge, then those that follow us or those that we work alongside, they're not going to be successful. Because especially right now with the temperature the way it is with policing, all you hear is negative. So I shouldn't be negative. I should be positive. I need to remember and strive to communicate where I come from and what it took to get here, especially as a woman in policing. That's for a whole different other discussion, folks. I think you have to accept your role, understand your role in service to others, those who love you, those who hate you, those who need you, and especially those who fear you. I think the weight of the badge gets heavy, but it's our responsibility to understand how we are viewed and perceived. it's a hard role if you're being real.
Thank you, Chief Robledo. Chief Stevens.
Thank you, Evan. I think to sum it up in one word, I'll say for the upper administration and for the leadership of an organization is to be the guidepost for that agency and for that community. And just to give you a little bit of information on how I intend and hope to respond today, when I received the questions last week and I looked at them, I realized that I had a tremendous opportunity.
Take the day off for 5 years.
And responsibility to ensure that I just didn't incorporate my own thoughts and opinions, but since I am representing the agency and the community, to get some of the thoughts and opinions of others. So I pushed those questions down about 20 people deep throughout the department and throughout the city and throughout our community. And so a lot of the responses you get from me today are going to be a mixture of my thoughts and opinions as well as those from the community. I can tell you that to a person, whether it was inside or outside the walls of this organization, when that question was posed to them, they saw the significance of law enforcement, not just the leadership, but the individual officers, as setting a tone for how the agency is perceived within the community. And there's a recognition that each individual member has that ability to affect how not just the city's law enforcement is viewed, but how the nation's law enforcement is viewed. And there was a feeling of an awesome amount of responsibility that goes with that. Just like Chief mentioned, it's a pretty heavy, I won't say burden, but I'll say responsibility. And it's also viewed as a high honor. And there's a lot of recognition by myself and those that I polled on this of the responsibilities and the honor that goes with the profession.
Thank you, Chief Stevens. Would anyone else like to weigh in? Go ahead, Chief Miller.
Yeah, I think no matter the size of your community, whether you're a large city or a metropolitan area or a small or whatever it may be, you are known and you set the example. You should set the example both internally within the organization, so the officers know that you are an example they can follow, and that the public knows that you are someone that has and represents the standards that they expect from the leader of their police organization. That you set high ethical standards for yourself, and you model those for the officers and for the community. Even in a small city, they may know you more one-on-one. I worked a lot in smaller cities, and then McAllen was a pretty good size department at the time, 150 officers or so, and still the chief was well known. Communication has changed through the years, but you're still an example, and people look up to you, and you should be the one that sets that example for others to follow.
Thank you, Chief Miller. Anyone else?
Chief John, I'll weigh in real quickly. When this was brought to my attention, this question, I immediately thought of Genesis 1:26, because it says that we're made in God's image. And I started thinking about nobility, and what does that mean? It means honor. It means bravery. It means integrity. Those types of things that, we're going to talk about dealing with the public and earning the public's trust. Well, you have to be that image bearer, and you need people in your organization that want to follow the direction that you're going. And the direction we need to be going is towards police legitimacy. Things like treating everybody that we deal with dignity and respect, which are some of those noble characteristics. Giving people a voice that we have interaction with, making them feel like they're being heard. And most importantly, just following the golden rule, doing the right thing and doing unto others like you want done to yourself. And I think if we can follow that platform as leaders, striving towards nobility, then the people that we lead will follow that lead. And that in turn will guide their path on how they treat the community, which is what we're trying to do, have a great relationship with the community.
Thank you, Chief Johnson. I'll move on to our second question. To understand the perceptions of policing held by some members of some communities, how important is it to consider how policing has historically developed and historically responded to those same communities? I'd like to send this question first to Chief Miller, who began his law enforcement career in 1975. You have 45 years of experience. I'd love to hear your response.
Well, every community is different, and I find that here in Bee Cave all the time. I was just having a meeting with a group of people, folks, residents, the other night, and you know, it is so shocking to me that people are so that. It's a good thing they feel so safe living in this community, but then the downside of that is, you know, nobody locks their vehicles, nobody locks things. You know, they wonder why their car got stolen in the middle of the night. Well, because you left it unlocked and you left the key pod in it. So somebody just jumped in it and drove off in your $70,000 car. Now, when I was policing in McAllen, it was a total different community and the crime rate was higher, still just a lot of property crime. But people were much more cautious. So every community is different. They have different expectations for their police department, for their police officers. And as the chief, you need to be able to understand and learn what those expectations are and then relay them back to your officers. So they are policing in a manner that the people who live in Bee Cave or McAllen or Austin or Denton or wherever it may be, that you're policing in the manner and the style that they want to be policed. You need to know that you're there, but you don't need to be noticed that much. You don't need to be calling attention to yourself. Just provide solid. You maintain and build public trust on every contact basis. Every contact that a police officer has. It's not done, you know, through dancing on social media web pages. It's done through hard, honest police work, following the golden rule, as Chief Johnson brought up, I believe.
Thank you, Chief Miller. Chief Robledo, I'd like to move to you. You are highly engaged in your community and you have a very deep commitment to diversifying the Pflugerville PD. How does this relate to the topic we're discussing?
Thank you. Actually, I like to dance on video, by the way. I think it goes a long way. And I think it humanizes the badge. And y'all are smiling because you know I'm right. You know, I think you need to know the history of your community. You have to know what's worked in the past and what didn't. What do your citizens want? What do they need from you? If you're out there, I have a rule of thumb. I may walk into a room full of strangers, but I'm going to leave with a room full of friends, because I was taught that you shake everybody's hand, you look them in the eye, and you say hello. And I think that that's what we're missing in society nowadays, is just the basics of being kind to one another, of being respectful to one another. And that goes with every time you open the car door, you get out and you show your human side first. I understand if it's, you know, if we're addressing a shooting and there's some violence, then you put a different hat on. But they are going to mimic what you are showcasing first. If you come out with a frown on your face, they're going to take that defense stance as well. But if you come out with a smile on your face, how can you beat the smile? Show your human side. You know, I mean, you have to model it, you have to teach it, you have to talk about it. So I like to go out there with the folks and say, hey, what's going on? You got to act a little silly sometimes. Sometimes you got to take a selfie. Sometimes you got to take a picture of yourself self-carrying out at Lake Pflugerville and showcasing the beauty of the community where you're serving. If you don't show the passion for their community, then they're not going to think you don't care about them. And that's just the way I lead.
Thank you, Chief Robledo. Anyone else want to weigh in?
Yeah, I would love to. I came up kind of in the same tree as Jessica did when you talk about being fully engaged and fully committed to your community. But on top of wearing that nobility hat, with that comes a huge dose of humility. And, we have become very comfortable as law enforcement over the years going into communities, over policing them and telling them what their problems are instead of engaging them and asking them, what do you need from us? So instead of us going to homeowners association meetings and telling them, you have a burglary of vehicle problem in your neighborhood, and they don't want to hear that. Their problem is they have teenagers that are staying out after dark and they're vandalizing stuff. Maybe that's more important to them than the 1 or 2 cars that are getting broken into on their street. When they tell you that there may be some drug activity on their street corner, we have to be more intentional about having conversations with them to educate them on what it's going to take for us to get that drug house. And it may encompass us stopping some good people in that neighborhood, but they need to know that. You need to be able to communicate with them. So when you're out there and you stop an innocent person that's just driving through the neighborhood or that lives on the same street as a drug house, and you're not really intending on harassing or, putting people out that you don't need to, you need to communicate that with them on your purpose of why you're there. And too many times we don't do a good job of communicating with our community and policing alongside it instead of policing it as an occupying force. So that's something that we need to do in addition to what everyone else has said. It's just opening up our departments and letting the community in more than we have ever before. Because right now, our profession as it stands, we're fighting for our lives, for our professional lives in many communities across the country.
Thank you, Chief Dixon. Chief Stevens, did you raise your hand?
I did. So our role in our communities is to serve people. And in order to serve people, we have to understand people. And what that means is we have to make the effort to understand aspects of culture and history, religion, everything that affects the people within our community. We have to have at least some level of understanding, and we have to be the driving force in making that effort. This was another one of the questions that when it was pitched out, I had differing opinions and feelings that came back from within the department. There was some commentary about the feelings that the narrative related to police and the need to get engaged in the communities is being misrepresented because police are doing a good job of that, but it's not really being spotlighted. And looking at the history and so forth, some people felt like there was a false narrative out there floating around about the origins and the history of police, while others acknowledge that everybody has a different experience. And whether it's from regions of the country, in our city, we have a lot of people that relocate from other countries, and we have to be somewhat in tune to the experiences they may have had in, say, India or something like that. So this is a question that there's a great diversity of thought on how we're doing and what we need to do. But by and large, majority of folks recognize that we are here to serve these communities, the members of our communities, and to do so, it can't just be like Chief Dixon said, it can't just be us going out there and saying we're the police and this is what we're going to do for you or this is what we see. It has to be us stepping forward and asking them, tell us about your experiences, let us explain things to you, and let's work on this together.
Thank you, Chief Stevens. Would anyone else like to jump in?
Yeah, Evan, this is Chief Drain. I would like to comment on this. On this particular question, the aspect of it that I found interesting was how do I, as the chief, make sure that my officers are modeling this issue of nobility when they engage with the community. And it can be a challenge. When I was in Amarillo, a department authorized maybe 375, I could do 3 briefings a day. I could hit 3 briefings a day and hit about 75% of my patrol officers because they were on a 10-hour shift. Everybody is in a central building downtown. Even my federal TFOs were within 2 blocks of me. And I think it's important that the chief personally reach out and touch officers eye to eye when we're discussing these issues. Yeah, email is helpful. We do videos. I'm sure the other leaders on here do as well, but you have to touch your officers. I'm back in Plano now, and we're very segregated, which is a positive in this COVID environment. But I've got 18 different patrol squads. 10 of them brief every day, and then I've got another 8 that are off on 12-hour shifts. It is almost impossible. It would take months to be able to hit all these guys. So what I do is when we hire every new police officer that come in, we're authorized a little over 400 officers, but I personally talk to every one of them. And when we talk about the history of law enforcement, we have a legacy. Our profession has a legacy of not protecting the civil rights of everybody. And it's important that guys come in today, know that, and have empathy and understand why people are protesting. They know about our legacy. They know about the authority the police officers have. And when you don't have a relationship with that community, that's why you're going to have friction. It's important that the cops know that. So I get the new officers that way. And then how I hit my incumbent officers is we go through a 40-hour in-service every year. And then that's my opportunity to talk to everybody. And at every in-service class, we talk about our mission statement year after year after year. It's discussed when they do their wrap-up test and in-service. They've got to quote the mission statement. It's discussed on all of our boards and things that for promotion, not for promotions, but for specialized assignments, we have to discuss this role you're going into. How does it fit into our mission statement and our values? And so that's how I try to make sure that even though I've got a very dispersed police department, we all have the same sight picture when it comes to this issue of nobility, how we treat people, and our mission statement.
Thank you, Chief Drain. I think I'll circle back around to something Chief Stevens touched on. Many law enforcement professionals report feeling unappreciated and maligned by the public. However, what are you all doing internally to create community, a cooperative spirit among your officers, and reinforce psychological safety within your own agency?
Come on, guys. Come on, guys.
Chief Robledo, I can redirect to you right now. You have a lot to say about this because you put a lot of importance on first responder mental and physical health and well-being. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I believe that police resilience is most important right now. We have to model that. We have to lead it. We have to take care of our folks. They're drowning right now. They're not only drowning mentally, they're drowning physically. They're burnt out. They feel like nobody cares about them. So who has to step up and care about them? We do. Our department does. Our community does. You need to highlight them. We need to do a better job of showcasing their excellence. If we're not their voice, guess what? The first time that something bad happens, that's going to be what's going to taint and paint your entire agency. But that's not true because they've done ABC all the way to Z. But whose job is it to show the community that we are the voice? We have the microphone be the champion of your agency. Showcase them. Show your community that we weren't born in this polyester. I wasn't. But you know what? This is what we do. This is how we engage. We're going to do a drive-by on a birthday party. We're going to hit the sirens. We're going to annoy your neighbors. We're going to set up some programs where we reach out to the at-risk children. We're going to do yoga. We do yoga at Pflugerville. Yeah, we do. And you know what? I got a little pushback at first, but after we did yoga, I had several people come up and said, "Man, I slept so well." And I said, "Yeah, guess what? You might have not looked so hot in those tights you were wearing, but you feel good." And now it's caught on. Command staff, we've got dispatchers, we've got civilians. We even have community members saying, "Hey, man, we saw y'all posting this stuff there. What else are y'all doing?" Well, we're doing peer support. Guess what? We're doing chaplain programs. So you guys are doing it. You're already doing it. Showcase it. Lead it. Highlight them.
Chief Stevens.
So I noticed looking on the screen here that my boss, Chief David Shilson, is online here. So I'm going to just kind of shot out a challenge. And if he promises to go first with the yoga, I promise that I'll go 224th. So is that a fair enough bargain there? I'm sure we'll talk about it after this conversation. Much like Chief said, we're doing all the same things. We revamped our peer support program. We're also in the process of developing a mentoring program to onboard people and give them some guidance and direction along the way. This question is one specifically. I wanted to actually read a couple of points that I received when I pitched the questions out there. One was from one of our commanders that said, the citizens we serve in our community remind us continuously that we are appreciated and that we matter to them, right? That to me says it all, because that tells me that what our people are hearing in the field from the community is the pats on the back and the encouragement. And they also recognize that it's because of the way they have policed with the community and served the community that it's being reciprocated back. Another comment that I wanted to share from one of our community members that I thought was very encouraging on this point was it was talking about officers that getting discipline or have issues or things like that come up. What they said was give reported officers a way to rehabilitate when it makes sense and welcome them back into the fold when it is deserved. What that tells me is we have a community that recognizes, look, police work and our department is not perfect, but we are perfecting every day. And we're doing the absolute best we can within the curb lines and the standards that has been established. And a recognition that there will be falls from grace, so to speak. But when those happen, if a person can be rehabilitated and there's opportunity there to bring them back and have them be successful, then we need to do that. And what that tells me is that we have a community that supports us, and we have to keep reminding our people that every day. And we do that through awards, recognition, conversations, and briefing. Events like this where they have the opportunity to jump online and listen to what the conversations are, and then just continuing to reinforce that, yes, it's a hard job, and but that our community is, by and large, right there with us. And we're fortunate to have that here in Frisco.
Yeah, this is Chief Drain, Evan. I'd like to piggyback on what Assistant Chief Stevens says. The Plano community is very much like Frisco, or I should say Frisco is very much like Plano, actually. And our community members here, our officers don't feel maligned, quite frankly. I mean, we have many of the things that Assistant Chief Stevens talked about. I'm sorry, Jessica, we don't have the yoga yet, but we'll look into that. But we have a mentorship program for new officers. We have a very robust peer support program. We highlight our officers. They're out here saving lives and doing things. They're going to be up on Facebook pretty quickly with a life-saving award. We highlight the things when our patrol officers do good work. We're letting the public know about that over nextdoor.com. And we probably got 100,000 people on nextdoor.com and 30, 40,000 or so on Facebook. And they flat love our officers. So we don't believe that our officers feel maligned. In fact, I don't even like to go out for lunch in my uniform anymore because somebody's going to pay for my meal. I mean, I cannot get out of a restaurant without, and I feel bad about it in my salary, someone making probably less money than me wanting to pay for my meal at Chipotle. So it is just really unfortunate, though, what I see, what officers in other places across the country are going through, out in the Northwest and in the Midwest and just all across the country. But here in this part of North Texas, quite frankly, I am not seeing those kinds of things happening with law enforcement, at least in the suburban communities.
Thank you, Chief Drain. Chief Johnson.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you have the pulse of your employees at this time. We've had a very difficult situation in that in our 60 employee organization, we had around 16 contract COVID, and we lost a sergeant who contracted COVID in the line of duty and ended up passing away. So the stress of COVID, the stress of a homeless situation out of control here in downtown Austin has weighed heavily on our deputies. Our office is situated right by the governor's mansion and the state capitol. So when Austin was engaged in protests, our office was vandalized as a result. And those reminders of walking into your office with negative negative connotations written all over the building, including the door you walk into. It weighs heavy on our officers. So we have to make sure, especially in this time where officers are under more stress than ever because of the narratives towards police, we have to make sure that we're communicating and that our deputies' mental well-being is where it needs to be. We're leading in suicide. It's always been a problem for officers, and Chief Robledo has done some great things with awareness here in the Central Texas area. But we need to know when our officers need help. And one of the things that I'm very proud of is that I work in a very diverse office, and that our leadership doesn't need to feel the need to take credit or have something be their idea. And as a result of losing our sergeant, it provided an opportunity for us to bring up some of our senior deputies and see if they could act as supervisors and manage the organization. And we're currently in a situation where we have 8 senior deputies that we've handed over the reins, and on a rotating basis, we're giving them the opportunity to supervise, lead, and bring new structural ideas to the table. And it's energized a lot of our employees to have that ability to do that. So being able to breathe into your employees and give them some freedom to do some difficult things can be good, and can also take their mind off of all the craziness that is going on right now.
Thank you, Chief Johnson. Chief Stevens, was there something else you wanted to share?
Yes, there was. I think another thing that we can do, and I'll give you an example, is we can do the things that we need to do as police leadership to assure our personnel that we are telling our story, and we're telling their story, and we're clarifying and correcting when there might be a narrative that comes from outside the organization that is incorrect. I had the opportunity a few months back to go speak to a police academy class, and they were about 7 weeks deep into the academy when the events unfolded in Atlanta at the Wendy's. And so I went to visit with them, and the one thing they wanted to know, I thought I was going to be there for 15 minutes having a conversation. It was an hour and a half. And what they wanted to know is, if we get into a situation, is our city government, is our police department leadership, are the district attorneys, are they going to support us? If we do what we were trained to do in the way we were trained to do it, and we can talk through any changes that might need to come to the profession as far as tactics later. But if we are doing what we were trained to do in the way we were told to do so and taught to do so, are we going to be supported? And I think that we have to be sure that we are out there as bosses on the regular, letting people know the good work that our folks are doing, and clarifying and correcting information that might come our way, or complaints or whatever that might come our way that are not founded. Had a lady here at the police department about 2 weeks ago, and we spent time walking her through a high-risk stop. And then we also walked her through some different scenarios and some videos and some different things that we've created for our Citizens Police Academy, a class called Perspectives. And when she was finished with that, she told me she had a complete paradigm shift as the way she was viewing these little video clips. That's our job as bosses and leaders, to help our community have that shift, because when they get that opportunity, then they can really look at things with a clearer lens, and it can then support our people accordingly.
Thank you, Chief Stevens. Chief Johnson, you touched on this a little bit. With all of the negatives associated with being in law enforcement, why do individuals continue to choose this profession? I'm going to direct this to Chief Drain and Chief Dixon, first of all, because you're both ex-military, and there's a strong parallel here. So would one of you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I'll do that. I think, at least in the case of the Plano Police Department, selling law enforcement is not a difficult proposition. I mean, we pay well, we have good pay and benefits, we have high standards, we require a college degree, unless you're like Frank and I, and you're a military veteran or you have prior police service, then you're required to have 60 college hours. So even with those high standards, we're able to recruit people to come in. We're a relatively diverse police department. We're about 20% minorities. Our African American population is about 8 to 9%, and we're right there with African American officers. So to be frank with you, it has not been a challenge to get people to come into law enforcement. This is a well-paying job. It has good pay and benefits. There's a lot of respect, I think, from the community, at least this type of a community that we have in Collin County and most of our North Texas suburban communities. And so we have not been finding it to be a challenge. When I was in Amarillo, it was a different story, quite frankly. The pay, and it wasn't so much a pay issue. It was just it's a very isolated place, and a lot of young folks coming out of the military, coming out of college. You know, it's a tough sell to try to get them to come up there. So a lot of the guys that you recruit, they're going to be from that Panhandle area, and so you've got to touch them early so they don't get in trouble, and try to work through them through Explorer programs and things like that to keep them focused. You know, because that's where you're going to get your folks from. It's probably from that Panhandle region. Versus here, we've got people coming. We've got guys in the military already overseas contacting us about, hey, when I get out, I want to come work for Plano. So it just depends on where you work, I think, on how challenging it is to get people to come into this profession.
And I'll piggyback on what Chief Drain said. We're not having an issue. We had a civil service test about a month ago. I was really dreading walking in the academy that morning as to what the numbers are going to look like. And when I walked in, we had the highest number since I've been here in 2 years. We had 83 people show up. It was the most diverse class by race, by gender. It was just amazing to walk in and see all of those young people in there, and some people coming from other departments in there taking the civil service exam to come work in policing during this time. Probably the most tumultuous time to be a police officer ever. And I had the ability to sit down and talk to one of them this week as I was hiring them, because I meet with each and every police officer that we hire. I meet one-on-one with them. And I asked, why? What drove you to still follow through with becoming a police officer right now? And they said it's because we did our research and we knew that the communities up here in North Texas supported their police. You guys have good benefits. You know, the bad thing about North Texas is we're all vying for the same pot of candidates. So it's extremely competitive. So when we're not facing the negativity surrounding the profession, we're really chasing the Planos because they pay with gold bond over there. I don't know what they're doing, but we're chasing each other, which is a good problem to have when you look at the pool of candidates coming in. And it's just really shocking to see the difference in the environment and how that can have a dramatic shift in the people that are coming out to still want to serve their community.
Hey, Frank, we've got some openings on our next academy if you want to come work for us.
Give me an age waiver, I'm there.
Chief Johnson.
Well, one of the things that I've been encouraged by, because thinking about this question, and a lot of times in the police community right now, you're hearing, I wouldn't tell anybody to be a police officer right now. I don't want my kids to be police officers. You hear a lot of that negative rhetoric from people in law enforcement. And something that stuck out to me in these difficult times is seeing there's an offensive lineman for South Carolina that's wanting to follow in the footsteps of Terrence Campbell, who was also a football player for South Carolina. And they had no desire initially to get into law enforcement, didn't care for people in law enforcement. But as a result of what they're seeing, now they do want to get into law enforcement and change what's going on from the ground floor. I'm very reassured that I'm an alumni advisor for a fraternity at Stephen F. Austin University. And one of our recent African-American presidents of our fraternity, who was very actively engaged, his name is Jonathan Barrow, very actively engaged on campus in social justice related issues, has also recently made the determination that he wants to be a police officer. And the most reassuring that I've seen recently is, I told you our office was vandalized by several groups. And in a very amazing way, the day after we were vandalized, some undercover officers were watching the office, and they saw these young people approaching the office, and they said, well, you're about to get hit again, and they were about to interact. And these young people were cleaning the graffiti off of our office. And we made contact with one of those young men, a man named Matias Zaragoza. And now he, as a result, has applied for the Travis County Sheriff's Office and has followed up with our office on how he becomes a law enforcement officer. He was a peaceful protester. He doesn't like the social injustice, but now he's taking a step to bring healing by becoming an officer themselves. So I'm very reassured by what's going on in our culture right now.
Thank you, Chief Johnson. I'd like to stay here for one more minute and kind of redirect to each of you individually. What drew you into the policing profession?
For me, growing up as a kid, I always knew I wanted to be either a police officer or a firefighter. Being afraid of heights, I knew that the 100-foot aerial ladder wasn't going to work for me. I had an uncle that was a homicide detective in Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. And hearing the stories in the early to mid 80s of the cases that he was working as the Jamaican street gangs had taken over D.C. and the crack cocaine epidemic and all the things that they were doing within the inner city in Washington, D.C., I knew that I wanted to be part of the solution and not continue on contributing to be a part of the problem. And similar to what Noel talked about, making change from the inside to make things better for everybody, not just one segment of your community, but your community overall, was a big draw to me. You know, I never thought about how much money I was going to make. I always knew that I wanted to truly serve after serving my country, coming back and serving my community, because there's so many amazing people within your community that don't have voices many times. You have these kids, sometimes the reason they go down that bad path is because they don't have anybody that believes in them. So just simply having conversations with kids and letting them know that they can do something or they can be someone is sometimes the only thing they need to really push them to doing the right thing and finishing high school and going on to college. And there's nothing more rewarding. There's not enough ribbons you can put on your chest to be standing in a store and having someone come up behind you, tap you on the shoulder, and say, I remember you 10 years ago, you saved my life by putting me in jail. And that is why I do what I do. And that's why I still do it, even now.
Evan, I'd like to comment as a female in policing.
Absolutely.
I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have a family member that was in policing. I was actually going to teach and coach, and that's what I got my degree in. I didn't realize that I had an interest in this until my 4th year in college. I was lucky to go to college because of my broken childhood. And I think I rely on that, and I like to tell my story, because when you talk about you're broken to your community, to your at-risk youth, then they see you. That's where your credibility comes in. Because you can say, hey, I did this. I went through this. I know what it was like to have a lunch ticket that was a different color than everybody else's. I know what it's like to get ridiculed because you didn't have any money, your clothes were old. They were hand-me-downs. I know what it's like not to have anybody present at your parent and teacher conferences. How many of you on this panel have ever felt that? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Yes. When you don't have that support. And that's why, as leaders in positions that we are right now, we have to go above and beyond. We have to speak from our hearts. I don't care if I'm the only one standing in a smoke-filled room. I'm going to shout it from the mountaintop. You're going to hear my heart, and I'm going to show you that I'm doing things for the right reason and that I'm leading from a pure place in my heart. I can go on and on, but I'm going to let somebody else talk.
As Chief Drain here, I did not, unlike Chief Dixon, I did not grow up thinking law enforcement wasn't even on the radar for me. I'm maybe probably older than many members. I was born in 1960 in East Texas, went to segregated schools. I can tell you firsthand what racist policing looks like when you grow up in the environment that I grew up in East Texas. So when I went off to go to college, I was in ROTC, so I went into the military, and as you mentioned, I was in EOD. And at least when there are no wars going on, one of the missions that EOD does is to help law enforcement. So I'm stationed in upstate New York, and unlike here, the state police in those northeastern areas, and those guys run those rural areas. It's not the sheriffs up there; it's the state police. Those guys have a lot of clout. They got a lot of people up there. They got a lot of resources. So they would call us out to assist with, if somebody found a hand grenade or a bomb or something, if it was in an area where they didn't have a bomb squad. And my respect for the New York State Police, I just thought those guys were awesome, quite frankly. And that's when I started thinking about going into law enforcement. But then when I looked into the New York State Police, it's like 10,000 people apply when they have an opening. So I just moved on with my career. But when I had an opportunity that was coming from an overseas assignment in Asia, and I was allowed to be stationed in Texas at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, I was about midway through my career. And at that point is when I started thinking about I wanted to maybe, since I'm back in Texas, this is an opportunity to go into law enforcement, and I did. So I guess what prompted me to go into law enforcement was my affiliation with law enforcement when I was in the military, and it wasn't just the state police. We also worked very closely with the federal agencies as well when they need to do searches for VIPs and things of that nature. So that's what did it for me.
We have two young men doing their college internship with us right now, and I can, from very recently having spent time and spoken with them, they have wanted to have interest in being a police officer the same as most of us. They think the job will be exciting, will be rewarding, that the benefits are still there, that for the most part the public does respect them, respect officers. They kind of believe they can help change things for the better. And I find internally a lot of the officers that we have hired in this organization, we are small enough they're able to, if they take a burglary report and there's information to follow up on, then they're allowed to take it and run with it. It doesn't just, the report doesn't just go into a computer and somebody in criminal investigation takes it and goes with it. So there's a little higher level of personal involvement, I think, in all their calls and the things they do. And we kind of use that as part of our niche when we try to recruit people. Every organization has their own niche, I think, things that you do well and things that you don't do well. And, we're not going to go out and recruit people and tell them that they're going to be a member of the BK Police Department SWAT team when we're just a 19-man police department. So, you have to find what it is that you do well and find the people that would want to do those things for a job and for a living and as a career. And I understand that we won't always, everybody you hire is not going to be a 25-year officer in this department and then retire from here. But I take a lot of pride and personal pride in seeing officers grow from, a rookie, first time they've ever had the opportunity to be a police officer. And if, they're lucky enough to leave here and get hired in Plano with 5 or 10 years of experience and the police chief in Plano be able to say, damn, they really know how to train those guys down there in BK. They've done a good job. And that's a reflection not only on this department, but on myself personally. So, and I was the same as them, luckily when I was 16 years old, I knew what I wanted to do and started right away at age 21 as soon as I got out of college. So, but saw the same things that these two young men that are doing their internship with us now saw.
Thank you, Chief Miller. I've got Chief Johnson and then Chief Stevens.
I remember from a very young age, seems like when I was 4 or 5 years old, I just always, wanted to be in law enforcement. And about the time that Desert Storm was going on, which was here and gone very quickly, I was like, well, I'm not, there's nothing going on in the military today. And I know I want to get into law enforcement. So I did get my degree, but as soon as I graduated, I started applying and have been blessed to have a great career and do a diverse amount of things in law enforcement. Um, we have a deputy here that started out at 21 years old, and one of the things that I see is the influence on individuals. And one of the things that I'm proud of here, besides our diversity, is that influence of nobility. I mean, we have a constable in Carlos Lopez that was the chief deputy here for 34 years and will be entering his third term. And he exemplifies nobility, compassion, and that's why we don't have a high turnover rate at this organization. A lot of people retire from this organization because of the atmosphere he's developed. Now, not all agencies are lucky to have somebody of that character leading the organization for that amount of time. So that's why you have to step up and do the best that you can when you're in that situation. But probably like most of us, it was just always what I wanted to do.
Chief Stevens.
Sure. So actually, I had intended to join the fire department, right? Because somebody had told me that they had the best job out there, because those guys get to sleep till they're hungry. And then they get up and they eat until they're tired. And so I'm like, this is what I want to do. Well, I went there and they must have either been eating or sleeping because nobody answered the damn door. So I went over across the street to the police station. That's not true. The way I got into police work was I grew up in Dallas, and the Dallas Police Department was a regular fixture in our house pretty much every weekend. And it all had to do with alcohol and family violence and divorce and just those types of things. And I was 8 the first time that I ever picked up the phone. And back then you dial the operator and say, connect me to the police. And then you give the police your address and then they come out. But I was 8 the first time that happened. And the officer that came out is Herman T. Sawyer. Anybody who's familiar with the Dallas Police Department might know him. He was there over 34 years. But Herman came out to the house, and this is probably like 1975. But I still remember him to this day. I could describe the things he said, the way he treated us, the way he came into our bedroom and talked to me and my brother while the guy that he must have been training was talking to my parents. But then fast forward a handful of years down the road, I left home between my junior and senior year of high school. I spent my 18th birthday at the MEP station, doing all the testing to go in the military. And as soon as I graduated, I went off in the Army as a military police. And I found out that I loved it. And it was because I felt like I had the opportunity to see what policing is really about in the way they have the opportunity to serve and help people. And when I got out, I had the opportunity I started applying, and I ended up getting picked up by Plano. But it was Herman Sawyer, and I had the opportunity to visit with him at his retirement. And I actually told him he was my first FTO, although he didn't know it. And one of the things I noticed through this conversation is there's a lot of us in this profession, and I don't mean just this conversation with the panel, but even the people that I pitched the questions to. I had somebody come into my office yesterday and say the reason that she got into law enforcement was that she grew up in a situation of an impoverished and so forth in a large city here in Texas. And the interaction she had with her family had with the police guided her that direction. In that regard, it was a negative contact, but it was based on something that we saw that caused us to say, I want to be part of that because I think that it's about doing good for people. And so that's what pulled me this direction. And when I talk to others in this profession around the department, around the state and around the nation, I found out many of them have a story very similar to where interactions early on whether positive or negative, caused them to want to get in it because they wanted to be a part of something bigger than themselves, or they wanted to get in it because they knew there was a job that needed to be done and they wanted to help somebody like themselves when they were in a situation, when they were young. So.
Thank you, Chief Stevens. It's an segue actually to the next question, and I'll stick with you, largely in part due to your training and your community connections. I'd love for you to weigh in on this. The national discussion seeking to address police brutality is necessary. The attention given the issue over the past few years is bringing to light a problem long experienced by many in our country. How do you propose that we as a nation in general, and law enforcement personnel in particular, address the issue of police brutality proactively?
Okay. So that is a question with a lot of tentacles, and I hope we have the opportunity, not just myself, but everybody on this panel has the opportunity to weigh in and give some perspective on this. I will tell you, based again on some of that feedback I received, everything from people saying there is history that needs to be looked at and recognized and addressed and not ignored, to people saying the narrative is false and the amount of brutality is not necessarily accurate, but it's being focused on. And the analogy given was if you take a star basketball player and all the media reports on is every time they miss a basket, then what you're going to believe is that that player can't play ball. But the stats might show otherwise. The statistics may show otherwise. Their history may show otherwise. But all everybody is going to believe is what they see from the media, and that the media is driving this. And there is, and my belief is there is truth to that the media is driving it. But it doesn't mean there's not history there. And it doesn't mean that there's not questions to be answered. So when I've been posed the question before, I sat on a panel 3 years ago and they asked that very question. What is driving these instances of police brutality, or what is your thought about police brutality? My response was, in order to answer your question, you're going to have to tell me what your definition of brutality is. Because honestly, police work is often brutal, but that does not make it brutality. And when you look at what I said was, if you look at the instances across the nation, and if you want to go back and you want to start wherever you want to start, but for that purpose, the starting point was Michael Brown to the most recent incident. I said, when I look at these cases with the same lens that you're getting to look at them, which is through that of the media and social media, because I don't have inside information, I said, I see three things. What I see is I have seen some instances of improper, incorrect, unlawful conduct, and it has to be addressed administratively by the agencies and by the justice system. Number two, I have seen instances that I believe are mistakes or unintended consequences, but they stem from officers trying to deal with subjects who are resisting them during some legitimate interaction. And the third thing I see is completely justified, righteous, 100%, probably what I would do, law enforcement response. So, but my fear is that the community doesn't see three things. They see them all the same, and they see them as wrong. And I've had the community tell me, I was at a church, and it's an African-American church, and they said, yes, we see them all as the same. Okay, so there's the disconnect. So what we have to do is we have to create that understanding and that perspective. And that's not going to come unless there's dialogue, interaction, trust. And it's not something you're going to do overnight. And it's not something you're going to do post-event. It has to be actions that you take with your community and working with your community and building those partnerships so that they trust you before you ever have a crisis that you're dealing with. Did I answer your question?
You did. Thank you so much, Chief Stevens. Anyone else?
I want to weigh in real quickly. Part of Chief Stevens brought up the media, and we got to do a better job. It's in our automatic response as law enforcement is the media is painting this the wrong way. Well, are we as law enforcement doing a good job of educating the public and working with the media to educate the media why things look brutal and what the reality of that interaction is in the heat of the moment? Another thing that's out there, and Chief Stevens once again brought this up, is this view from law enforcement of, hey, this is all a false narrative. And so we're just going to shut it down, and we're not going to deal with the false narrative. And I don't want to hear from Black Lives Matter, because this is an organization that was built on anti-police rhetoric, and their members are engaging in domestic terrorism in cities across the U.S. Well, here's the reality. The BLM movement isn't going anywhere. And they are now commercialized. They're supported by corporations. Their voice is growing bigger. And if we as law enforcement don't want to be judged on our bad apples, which we have bad apples, and I don't think anybody is straying from admitting that, but we want to have our voice, and we want to say, hey, this is an isolated incident with an officer that should have been addressed a long time before. In the same sense, we can't dismiss organizations like Black Lives Matter and say we're not going to communicate with them. We actually need to be working hard to establish some fruitful dialogue, because there are some great people, believe it or not, within those organizations as well, really, truly trying to figure out how we come together. And I know that that's probably not a popular viewpoint for many in law enforcement, especially law enforcement administrators. But we have to look at the reality of what's out there with the media, with these organizations that we need to work closer with as the law enforcement community to better communicate on what we need to be doing as law enforcement, and communicating the reality of what their perception is, because perception is reality, and we could all do a better job of that.
Yeah, Evan, this is Chief Drain. I concur with what Chief Stevens and Chief Johnson said. And I think one of the other things we need to do to address this issue is we need to be more transparent. You see these incidents happen on television. Stevie Wonder can see that the community is upset by these issues, and the chief or the sheriff or whoever the executive is, they don't come out and explain. And I realize we can't show, in some cases, maybe we can't show the video, but the video isn't going to change if you go to the public, especially if there is a narrative that's floating through the community that's untrue. We continue to see that these things that are happening out there that are totally false, and they run rampant on social media, and we have agencies don't come out and address them. And I realize in some cases, some of these agencies are having other agencies do their investigation, so now they're kind of controlling the narrative. But if it's my town that's about to burn, I'm going to have to get out there and say something. And I think that we need to do more of that, especially to cut off some of these things that are not true that are happening in the community. If we take the case of that school shooting that happened down in Florida, that young man is still, of course, entitled to due process. He hasn't gone to trial yet, but can you imagine not talking about that case for this whole time when you've got all these young kids that are killed? Sometimes we're going to have to get out there and talk about these bills, and I think we can do that and still protect the due process of the officers that are involved.
Thank you, Chief Drain. We have time for one more brief answer if anyone else would like to weigh in on this topic before we move on.
I'd like to say something. Hello?
Go ahead.
Great point. I think it's important. We're all keying in on the same thing: address it internally, and most importantly, address it externally. Don't stay quiet. I made a video for George Floyd, like a bunch of other folks, and I needed folks in my community to see my passion. I made show ups, and I asked the guys, I said, hey, what do you think? Everybody was upset. And it gave me a sense of what the organization was feeling and thinking. And I said, it's okay to express what you feel to our citizens. Be respectful. So we have to make sure that we're able to give that courage, so to speak, to our staff to be able to share their heart, to tell the citizen, man, that didn't sit well for me. That's not who we are. If you allow them to do that in a respectful way, it'll work. Reach out to your religious groups. I probably should have gotten a criminal trespass warning from certain church services because I kind of inserted myself into some of those, but I wanted my voice to be heard. I wanted the folks from Pflugerville to know how I felt about it, that it didn't sit well. It was wrong. That's not who we are, and that's not how we police. So I think it's important everybody's keying on the same things.
Thank you, Chief Robledo. So in closing, I'd like for each of you to share just 2 or 3 words on what you feel is most important in repairing this rupture of basic trust and building a foundation necessary to support a true partnership moving forward between police personnel and the communities they serve.
I think courage. You have to have the courage to go out there and do things that traditionally we have not done. Compassion and understanding. If I were to pick out 3, those would be 3 of many that I would start with. We've got to do a much better job of connecting with our communities on the granular level and letting them in where we haven't before.
Excellent, Chief Dixon. Thank you.
I would say transparency to the public and to our officers.
Yeah, I would say that empathy and openness to the officers and to the public, and certainly as the chief, you should be the example to both, to your community and to your department.
I'd say accountability, integrity, and empathy.
So because some of the others are, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Chief Drain.
Yeah, I would say that if we just follow those tenets of procedural justice as laid out by the Commission on Policing the 21st Century, I think we're going to be pretty close.
And I'm going to jump in there, and a lot of them have been covered. I'm going to say role modeling, and that's administration for the officers, because if, much like the tenets of procedural justice, if we offer role modeling internally, then our officers will have the model for which to serve the community. Somebody mentioned empathy, and that one is extremely important in this profession. And then a mindset of it's not us versus anybody. It's not administration versus officers or police versus the community. It's with. The word is not versus, the word is with. We're all in this together, and we're going to continue to be in this together. So we might as well actually be together.
Yeah, I would say accountability is obviously a key one. Being a constable's office, we get to do things a little bit different, and 2/3 of the people that we deal with are not criminals. So we operate with plain clothes and unmarked cars because we're approaching people, giving them bad news, and they're in a crisis, whether it's a mental health crisis, their wife is leaving them, they're being sued by a company. And so we found that soft approach with people is imperative, and it goes back to the compassion and just letting the people that you serve know that their voice is being heard. And so accountability and compassion are the top 2 for me.
Thank you, Chief Johnson. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for your insight, your leadership, and your dedication to your profession, and for sharing your wisdom with us today. Thank you for everyone who watched this event. Please join us in November for the next event in the series, Clearing the Pathway for Healing and Policing in America. You can follow Lion Strategy Group on all of your social media platforms, including LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And Lion Strategy Group would like to urge every police officer to patrol with passion, drive with care, and remember that you are part of a special team with 4 fundamental goals in common. Always act with integrity. See wrong and try to make it right. See suffering and try to heal it. And for all of you, make it home safely at the end of your shift. Thank you again. Have a good afternoon.